This story is called The Subway. Ow! Owie, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. Please, please don't let this be happening. Owie! Owie! Obviously, I was going into labor. And I was very confused. The Lamaze lady had said that the beginning of this ordeal was called happy labor because the contractions were short and the time in between was long. Well, I was not happy. I had no drugs, no threshold for pain, and I was with my mother. I hurled myself into traffic, bent in half like Quasimodo, and madly like a banshee hailed for a cab. My mother pulled me back in her lobster claw grip. Come on now, the subway's right over there, and walking is good for you. My mother is a certified narcissist, which means walking is good for her. She was also a daughter of the Great Depression, and $20 for a cab was out of the question. I was not a daughter of the Great Depression. I was merely extremely depressed. As we descended into the bowels of Manhattan to catch the downtown local subway to 68th Street, I called my husband, who was thrilled that my eyeballs were popping out of their sockets. He, of course, would be taking a cab to the hospital. I thought, as long as he's there ahead of me, why doesn't he give birth? I mean, I was terrified at the idea of a large watermelon coming out of something the size of a pimple. I wasn't like those women in Lithuania with wide hips who needed large families to mow hay and milk chickens. I was a different type. I was a city girl, and I liked discussing Nietzsche over Chardonnay in small cafes. The downtown subway was, of course, packed. I was in a seat between my mother and a very lovely-looking lady who I wished was my mother. In Lamaze, the teacher had said, "Go to your mental beach. Relax." Well, I was staring out at a sea of wary, even hostile subway riders. What if the watermelon plopped out right there in front of them? What if, like a projectile, it hit one of them in the face? The train shimmied and stalled and clamored and lurched, and I owied and owied again and again, and my mother hissed at me through smiling teeth and said, "Get a grip." Smiling was big with my mother. When I was a kid, she starred in a TV show, and we had a lot of at-home interviews. My father was usually drunk, had a mouthwash a lot, and tried not to rage uncontrollably. I had to play with my parakeet. I hated this parakeet. It was my fourth parakeet. The others all died and had to be flushed down the toilet in a New York City type burial. I vowed to get my child something you could never flush down a toilet, like a wildebeest or a Great Dane. The train slammed to a halt at 78th Street, as though trying to avoid running over some other woman in labor who had thrown herself onto the platform. "Think about it," my mother was soliloquizing. "Soon you won't be fat anymore." Thin was as important to my mother as smiling. After my father was out of the picture, my mother and I ate at the kitchen counter standing up. We would have sandwiches without bread, celery, a radish. "Cooking is such a waste of time," she'd say. I mean, what does your friend Janie's mother do all day? Cook pot roast and read magazines? I wanted to say no. She was on the PTA, helped Janie with her homework, and lavished her with love. A concept I know my mother would have found deeply suspect. 72nd Street, the doors banged open, humanity jostled for seats, and I blurted out, shut, shit, fuck, piss, along with my owies. My mother ignored me and focused on a handsome Wall Street type who just boarded the train and caught her eye. She grinned and shrugged at him, inching away from me as I continued to owie, as though I were one of those loopy subway denizens who talked to the Pentagon through their aluminum hats when they weren't on the line with Jesus. One more stop, and I could run away from her, just like I wanted to do when she gave me the infamous autograph book. It was my job to get the autographs of all the famous people we'd met, because she was kind of famous herself, but it would have been gauche for her to ask, so I had to. I was on my 5th parakeet when word got out in the building that Marilyn Monroe was seeing a psychiatrist on the 9th floor. My mother told me I had to get her autograph. 3:30, and I was in the elevator with Miss Monroe, very pale, dark glasses, a mink coat. I got up every scintilla of nerve, and I said, "Excuse me, Miss Monroe, could you sign my autograph book for my friend Susie Ottenberg? She has a brain tumor." I don't know how that came out. All Susie had was a bad headache once in a while, but I was in the grip of a very heightened reality. Miss Monroe signed. I showed it to my mother. She read it in disbelief. "Dear Susie, I hope you get better. Love, Marilyn Monroe." Her tone of voice made me run into my room, erase the entire page, and trace it over. I showed the new version to my mother. Her chin quivered. Not a good sign. "You traced over the whole autograph?" she said. "I know, but now it says, 'Dear Barra.'" I pointed that out to her, but she glared at me and groaned very deeply. To my 8-year-old brain, the groan translated into, "Why don't you walk out onto the window ledge and see if you can fly, preferably in clean underwear?" Poor Marilyn. Poor me. But wait a minute. Not poor me. It flooded over me like a wave at the beach as we screeched to a stop at 68th Street. I emitted a noise, not an owie, but a wowie. A word you say when something hits you. A eureka moment. Without knowing it, the subway ride had taught me everything I needed to know about how to raise my child. Just don't be my mother. I mean, focus on her so-called parenting skills and run wildly in the opposite direction. I didn't even have to buy a book. I felt a strange sense of calm and certitude. I could hang out a shingle for all confused, expectant mothers. It's okay for your mother not to be your role model. I mean, if Medea's kids had moved in with a neighbor, they may have lived into their teens. Wisdom at last. I hobbled almost springingly out of the subway in great anticipation of drugs and hopefully not seeing my mother again until next Shavuos, which is a Jewish holiday that no one knows when it is. So it's never celebrated. My husband was waiting for me at the hospital doors. He was beaming. My mother, thank you God, beat a quick retreat to chat up a doctor way too young for her. And then the moment came, and our daughter was born, a wondrous girl who doesn't lie, only smiles when she feels like it, and when necessary, hails the first oncoming cab. And by the way, that wondrous girl is sitting in the front row, my daughter.